Tonight, yet another cabinet shakeup. The VA secretary kicked to the curb, and now advisors, believe it or not, they're telling this president that he should be his own chief of staff and communications director. Oy vey, things could even get rockier at this White House. Then, the gun debate gaining traction after the huge marches just last weekend. Senator Richard Blumenthal, he'll join us to talk about what he sees will happen next in the gun debate. But it's not just politics this evening. It is also a big day when it comes to sports. Opening day. Everybody loves opening day. And the Mets actually had a good start to the season, and the Yankees, as we speak, in good shape as well. I'm also going to be speaking with Nancy Grace and Dan Abrams about the new show they've got premiering tonight, and it was a very entertaining conversation. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for it. Welcome to RFL, everybody. I'm Richard French, and we begin tonight at the White House, and more changes happening with this president's cabinet. David Shulkin, he is out as Veteran Affairs Secretary, and President Trump's doctor, Ronnie Jackson, again, personal doctor, he's going to replace him. How a guy with a lack of managerial experience, any managerial experience, will be running the second largest government agency is a question many are asking on Capitol Hill. He is far from the first questionable pick by this president. Dr. Ben Carson, he is running HUD. He has zero experience when it comes to public housing prior to getting the job. Rick Perry at Energy, he actually wanted to get rid of the entire department, and he didn't realize he'd be overseeing the country's nuclear weapons. EPA head Scott Pruitt, he was the Attorney General of Oklahoma before Trump appointed him, and he made a living suing the very agency he now leads. And the list, it goes on and on. Plus, now some of the president's outside advisors are actually telling him, hey, Mr. Trump, you don't need a chief of staff. Or, by the way, a communications director. You should be doing those jobs as well as president. Well, joining me now to hash all of this out, ABC News political director Rick Klein. As the Trump world turns here, yet another exit, this time the VA director. I'm curious from your end, Rick, from covering not only this administration but previous ones, is it more shocking that they're all getting fired, that there's not a coordinated resigning, moving on to the next thing, or maybe even some of the tone in that really bitter op-ed piece that was penned today?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. Look, the president has made clear that he is not happy with everyone in his cabinet, and Secretary Shulkin has had his own issues. I was, though, struck by the way that Secretary Shulkin described this. He was basically saying that political operatives inside his own VA have been conspiring to try to change the course of it, even privatize the Veterans Administration, and he was resisting that. So he cast this as much more of an ideological policy fight going on inside his own agency, directed by people who were appointed by the Trump White House. That's bizarre, and I think in another White House it would be a days-long or weeks-long scandal to try to unpack. In this White House, it's just another cabinet secretary who's being shown the door.
And not just on the privatization, but also seemingly that the VA, the second biggest agency that we have, became a political arm, or at least that's what he said it was turning into. Now, Rick, you know, I've seen the reporting on this, and it's, I would almost say, too bizarre to believe, but is it actually possible the president is seriously considering removing the position, forget about just the person, for both chief of staff and communications director? My God.
Yeah, when I saw the headline, I thought, well, you know, maybe you'd be more honest to say he is his own chief of staff and his own communications director. I think the positions are likely to survive. The question is what kind of structure they're empowered to enact. The president has at times worked as his own chief of staff, controlling access as he likes. He's also at times worked as his own communications director, announcing things whenever he feels like it at any hour of the day via any method that he chooses, including Twitter. So I think whoever fills those roles has to realize that your wings are clipped by necessity. I think all of it, though, just reflects a president that actually is increasingly comfortable in the role. The chaos, I think, belies an underlying truth that this is a president who has managed things as a disruptor his entire life and is kind of sick of those conventions and is doing things his way more and more.
But there is a consequence, and particularly the chief of staff. Everybody remembers when General Mattis came in, one of the first orders of business was that he restricted access to the president, that there wasn't an open door in the Oval anymore. And I know that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. to that end, if they go back to the old way, that was part of the problem about the impulse control and the last person in the room basically shaping policy. There was a method and a reason. Even his biggest supporters acknowledge there was a necessity for that kind of a gatekeeper.
That's right. And look, even his biggest supporters will say, I wish he wouldn't tweet these things in the middle of the night either. But he continues to do that. I think, look, he's going to manage things the way he wants. I think the president has made that abundantly clear at this point. And I think the structure that surrounds him has to fill that mission. Otherwise, he'll find new people to fill the jobs. And I think the chaos in another White House would be overwhelming. And in this White House, it certainly blotted out a lot of the sun. But the president himself, I think, is comfortable with this. And I think he's less and less likely to take that advice from outsiders to say, you need to do it this way, you need to do it that way. He's going to do it his way.
And particularly stunning given the legal exposure he's looking at right now and the importance of vetting who's coming in and out of the room and talking to the president and all that to get rid of that barrier. To me is shocking, but who knows. All right, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, what is the consensus in D.C. right now with the president at least giving intimations that he's going to, through the Justice Department, go after Amazon on the heels of what the Time Warner deal right is? There is a consensus that obviously Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, Time Warner, CNN, that there's a political enemies list potentially, and that has to do even with capitalism.
It sure looks like that from a lot of observers' perspective. We've seen him link Bezos and the Washington Post, and his tweaks at the aggressive coverage of that very well-known newspaper are all there. He has been talking about this for quite some time, and going after Amazon, I think, is not really a secret to people that have been listening to what the president said, even back to the campaign trail. But it is hard to ignore the potential conflicts here and overtones of what it means for the president to be personally attacking a private industry. We've seen its stock price suffer as a result. Of course, there's all sorts of regulatory things that can be done, and if any of those things are politically motivated, that is another level. So far, the White House is saying this is not about politics. It has to do with policy. It has to do with regulations. We'll see if the president crosses any new barriers with this.
Stay tuned. Rick, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, now let's go back to the cabinet shakeup here. David Shulkin, the Veterans Affairs Secretary, he is not leaving quietly. I want to read a part of the op-ed that I referenced there that he wrote for the New York Times. Quote, "In recent months, the environment in Washington has turned so toxic, chaotic, disrespectful, and subversive that it became impossible for me to accomplish the important work that our veterans need and deserve. Until the past few months, veteran issues were dealt with in a largely bipartisan way. Unfortunately, the department has become entangled in a brutal power struggle with some political appointees choosing to promote their agendas instead of what's best for veterans." Let's bring in our panel. A couple Richards, not counting myself. Richard Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman from Westchester, a professor at NYU, as well as a full-fledged member of the media now. Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist, former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association, and Andrew Whitman, of course, our senior political correspondent.
Just call me Richard.
There we go. I joked there that thankfully I stopped myself from saying. Okay. Mr. St. Paul, you're a veteran, okay? The idea that the second largest agency after defense in this country is going to be run by somebody who's never even run a popsicle stand. And his qualifications reportedly are that he praised the president's health profusely when he did his physical. As a veteran now who understands the complexity of what the VA entails, why doesn't that outrage you? Or does it?
Not only that, my father, former Marine, received a lot of his medical services, actually all his medical services from the VA. So the VA, to me, is very important. One of the most important agencies, I think, in the federal government. And who runs the VA is important too. What I would say is I am encouraged by the president's commitment to fix the VA. And there had been, under the former VA secretary, a number of different firings and reforms. Remember, before President Trump came in, there were a lot of veterans who were dying, literally waiting for medical assistance. So there's a commitment.
And I will say, the veterans groups that spoke out today, they were in support of Shulkin and the reforms that he had done underway.
Of course.
Andrew, the big thing apparently is, yes, he was embarrassed by some of the travel things and there were failings, but he ain't alone there in this administration, including people who still have jobs, who were flying first class or going to Fort Knox to go watch the eclipse, to I can go up and down the line here, we'll be here all
Treasury
night.
Secretary, EPA
This was
Director.
really about, in large part, privatizing the VA, which nobody I've talked to thinks is a good idea given their core mission and the scope of what they're doing.
And that was one of the things that Shulkin mentioned in that op-ed, that there are a number of forces that want to privatize a number of the services that the VA provides, particularly when it comes to veterans health care. He was holding himself up as resisting those efforts. With him out of the way, one would assume it would be easier for that process to happen and sort of away from the spotlight, which I think is one of the causes of concern. Though it's perfectly arguable that Shulkin is simply bringing that up to try to counter the fact that he did embarrass the administration through some of the travel
But my only point
issues.
is, if there's zero tolerance policy for somebody who's taking free tickets, flying first class when they shouldn't have, screw-ups, then apply it across the board. I mean, I can go up and down the list, including from the aforementioned Mr. Pruitt here. I can go to Mnuchin. I can go up. Guys still have jobs.
Yes, and I agree with you, but the president does have the right to have the cabinet that he wants and to appoint the people that he wants in the positions that he thinks
Fair
we
enough.
can work with.
But Richard, there are certain appointments that you would think there needs to be some knowledge base. The idea that he was going to make the head of the FAA his personal pilot, or that this guy who's an admiral, but basically he's a physician who's never run anything, and Ben Carson, I think that
loyalty counts for more than competence in this universe. Maybe that's what the American people wanted. It's an old story with Trump. It was true when he was running his business empire. It's true when he's president of the United States.
But can you explain to the people out there who think, oh, it's just an appointment? No, there are certain jobs where you need A, experience, and B, management experience. For example, you want to give somebody an appointment to Macedonia or whatever as an ambassador, fine, okay? But you don't make somebody the head of the VA that's never had any job.
Lest I be accused of stumbling into a defense of Trump, I fully agree with you. It doesn't matter. These are people who don't like the government, are trying to defund it, delegitimize it, decompetentize it, and make it look unsuccessful. It's part of an overall agenda. It's not an accident.
And we're screwing with veterans health care, though, which is what it comes down to.
It's going to put an enormous focus on who his deputy is, who one assumes would be ostensibly actually running the department, which there's not a lot of focus on. The other question is, would this guy pass Senate confirmation? Which I'm not entirely sure that he would.
Now,
the
doctor.
admiral?
The admiral.
Okay,
Admiral
now,
Doctor.
Now, Richard, my next one for you is, you want to see this president succeed. Listen, we all do. I beat on him every night, but he's our president, and I want to see for the better part of the country, for the country to do well, obviously. However, for the people who look out for his self-interest, everybody agreed when they moved Priebus out, they needed somebody to say, you stay out of this room, you guys come through me here, we're going to have some semblance of order, some message control here. And I said it before, impulse control he doesn't have, so somebody's got to help him help himself. Yeah. The idea that people are floating to him, get Mattis out of the picture, Kelly out of the picture, and then you basically be your own chief of staff, you be your own director of communications, that should scare the living you-know-what out of you, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. Look, I've worked for candidates who are running for office. I've worked for people who govern also, who won the election and also govern. And I remember one particular candidate who ran for a statewide office would do or say what the last person who talked to them said to them. And that is not a good idea. There has to be, not everybody should have access to the president. The president shouldn't be his own communications director or chief of staff. He's focused on a number of different things.
You're saying that some appointed official should be controlling the elected president of the United States.
No. Not controlling.
Yeah, not controlling?
Every chief of staff controls access for people coming in and out. Sure, the president will give directions as to, what he or she wants in terms of structure, but you can't let everybody have an open door policy.
If he wants to have an open door policy, he should make that decision. This is for him, not for you and me.
Look, having worked, and White House, the governor's office, and different governments, being an elected official myself, not everybody should be walking into the there's far too many things that a president has to deal with.
Especially this president, who, if he sees something on Fox News, is going to immediately,
You're
that next minute,
asking
respond.
me whether I would recommend they have a chief of staff and a communications director. I would.
Right.
But I think we got to go very careful
I'm
here.
not saying he can't do it. I said it's not in his self-interest, or let alone this administration's.
I'm
You had
just
a
saying
chief
that
of
that's
staff,
not a
didn't
good
you?
idea.
I did.
Okay, so you have the healthiest self-image of any person I've ever met.
That's
the
true,
idea,
and well earned.
right? The idea,
Well earned.
The idea that you would have a communications person or press office, and you would also have a chief of staff says, even with that healthy self-image,
Again,
that there's a value to that.
Again, I think he ought to have those positions filled. But again, you're in effect saying, and you actually, in your opening, you said it more clearly than I'm putting it right now. You said he needs to have someone over him who can tell him no, impulse control. He's the president of the United States.
Again, he
If
can do it, but I just think it's unheard of for a reason.
Whether they
It's
tell
crazy.
him no
It'd be
or yes,
nice-
he needs different viewpoints in order to make a decision. That's how any leader should make a decision based upon many different viewpoints.
It would be nice to have a little bit more normal in this administration. This is so abnormal, and it feels abnormal. It's one of the things that I think is oppressing people and turning people off. It would be nice to have a little more normal, and for him to recognize it might not be what I want, but just a normally functioning White House, it makes people feel at ease.
And guys, with the two attorneys here, he's in the middle of a probe, okay, from Bob Mueller with 19 killers in terms of investigation. And the idea that right now would be the time, I got to go to a break, that you're going to now keep away gatekeepers for people with access to the room, that I think is beyond self-defeating. I think that's suicidal. Anyway, coming up next, Senator Richard Blumenthal. He will join us. He's going to have a conversation with Andrew about the gun debate. Democrat from Connecticut weighing in on the politics of guns and the national movement started by those high school kids from Parkland, Florida. Then, a bombshell development in the Mangano corruption trial today. The jury hearing wiretaps of the former NASA County exec fights corruption charges.